I am so excited to announce that I have released the first official tarot diagnosis spread book. Tarot and Self-Discovery is a therapeutic tarot journey with over 200 spreads, including over 152 card prompts and over 50 robust tarot spreads. You can purchase a physical copy on Amazon or a digital copy at thetarotdiagnosis.com. You are listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. I'm your host, Shannon. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I also happen to have a love for tarot. Each episode, I invite you to reflect with me as I work to demystify the tarot and the human experience, all while exploring tarot's connection to mental and emotional health. While this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is not meant to take the place of psychotherapy. So grab your cards and join me as I work to create a pathway to better understand ourselves and those around us. I am so excited to be able to sit down and chat with one of my favorite creators and authors, Chelsey Pippin-Mizzi. Chelsey is an author, tarot reader, and certified shadow work practitioner. She combines tarot and other witchy practices with her 15 plus years of experience working in the creative industries to provide inclusive, supportive, and playful resources to artists, writers, and creative entrepreneurs. She's the author of the Tarot Spreads Yearbook, Tarot for Creativity, and the forthcoming The Shadow Path. Hi, Chelsey.
Hi, Shannon. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you here. You are seriously like one of my favorite tarot creators. I think that you have such great energy, and we've been able to work together a couple times now. And I was eager to have you on the podcast. And you wrote Tarot for Creativity, a fantastic book that we're going to dive into today. So yeah, I'm really happy you're here, and I'm glad that you're happy to be here.
Thank you. I feel the same. So we'll have a mutual hour of enjoying each other's company and insight. I'm excited.
Absolutely. So yeah, you recently wrote Tarot for Creativity. Can you just give us a brief overview of what even this is and how it came about? Let's start there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So Tarot for Creativity is my second book. My first book, The Tarot Spreads Yearbook, came out in 2023 and is followed up by Tarot for Creativity. But in fact, Tarot for Creativity is the first book that I ever knew with certainty I would finish writing. I started working on it in 2020 before I wrote the Tarot Spreads Yearbook. And the reason I think it spoke to me as an idea is because that's first and foremost how I was using the tarot when I started to write the book. I came to the cards as a storytelling device. The very first question I ever asked them was about a novel I was trying to write and struggling to finish. And I like to say that when I turned the cards over in this very first reading, they went, no, stop writing that novel, write about us. And ever since, I have been. And this book is really a culmination of everything that I've learned since that first reading, where already I was asking the cards for insight on how to create, what to create, how to be inspired, how to move past block. And that was something that I just really loved them for offering me. They offered the conversation that I often needed to have with fellow writers or mentors who aren't always available or don't always have the insight that I needed. And there were the cards that had it for me. So when I started putting together the book, it really felt like both a reflection of my years of working with it as a creative tool, but also everything that I hoped other writers who I knew and who I loved and who I taught to use the tarot and other artists would find within the pages something to work with at any given time that would move them past a little bit of a creative sticking point or creative question.
Wow. Yeah. And you can really hear the creative relationship. I think you have obviously like with the cards, with the way you're talking, but something that stood out the most just then was you using the word conversation, the cards giving you the ability to have a conversation that maybe you weren't able to have otherwise, or that wouldn't have been like as accessible with certain folks. And I feel like that's such an important reminder and way to view the cards. And I really love what you did with the book. I do think it is a brilliant mashup of both a tarot interpretation book and also a guide for embracing, reinvigorating, or exploring your creativity. And I feel like it's so we in the community that I have the symposium, we have a book club that we do each month. And I was so excited because we were doing your book in October. And I was really curious to hear how other people were going to kind of react to or interact with this book. And it was all positive, and it was everyone really also enjoyed the juxtaposition between having this book as clearly like what you were describing, an opportunity to have a conversation with the cards, and yet there's still this underlying component of creativity, and yet still an option where if you maybe even if you aren't an artist or a creative, to have a really dependable, accessible, reliable resource for you to explore the cards. So I think you kind of like maybe inadvertently did all of these things in one book, but everyone who was a part of the book club had kind of the same reaction. Really enjoyed like the formatting, like your approach to having a page dedicated to each card, and then also having, the interpretation and prompts and a spread. It was like all of that shows the creative component of your brain and your relationship to tarot. And yeah, I thought it was such a fun way. And honestly, if I ever write a tarot interpretation book, that's the format I would want to use. So you're really kind of paving the way.
Oh, thank you.
But I'm curious, like, how did you even come up with the idea to format it like that? Is that the way, like when you knew, oh, this is where I'm going to shift my focus and talk about the cards? Did you know right away that that's how you wanted it to be? Was there something else that happened? What was that process like?
That's a great question. Yes and no. I think so. This book started out as a short ebook that I was going to use for lead gen for a workshop on tarot for creativity I was working on in 2020. And so what I wanted was a kind of shorthand tarot for creativity guidebook where I just broke down, here's a couple of sentences on every card with their creative context or creative definition, just to get you going for the rest of the workshop. And I wrote it and I made it available to participants in that workshop series. And then I put it on sale for about 2 weeks. And I went, what am I doing? This is an entire book. This isn't a 30-page ebook. This is the book I'm supposed to be writing. And very quickly from there, it took shape in my imagination. I really thought about what I would have wanted. I'd been on the lookout for a guidebook that really focused on tarot for creativity. And there are a lot of really brilliant books out there that touch on the tarot's creative power. I hardly think that I'm the first person to identify that. Rachel Pollack was a novelist as well and has written about the intersection of tarot for creativity a lot across her many books. And obviously she turned to the cards often in her creative focus. There's a great book out there called The Creative Tarot by Jessica Crispin, which I read very early on in kind of my exploration of tarot as a creative tool. But what I often found in books that either touched on or even focused on tarot as a creative tool, they were all really theoretical. There wasn't a lot of practice. And so I knew very early on, I wanted readers to feel like they were coming to a workshop with me. I love being at the table. I love working. I came from a theater background originally. I worked in rooms with other writers for a long time. So I loved the collaborative idea of like, let's get something down on paper. Let's not just think about how the cards can be creative. Let's do something with it. And so it became clear to me format wise, I wanted to write an interpretation. I wanted to use my own creative skill to write about the cards. I wanted to create art in that way where I put together an essay for each card that explained my point of view on it. As a writer, that's the work I love. But I also wanted there to be a spread for every single card. I loved working with spreads at this time in particular. I wanted a lot of creativity spreads, and there were not that many focused on creativity that I could find out there at the time, and certainly not collections of books focused on creative spreads. And so I knew I wanted a really robust collection of tarot spreads, but I also didn't want readers who felt very new to the tarot to feel overwhelmed by just spreads.
Yes.
So I wanted there to be these creative prompts for every card where even if you didn't own a tarot deck, you could flip through the book and
Yep.
land on a creative prompt to get you going that was inspired by the card in some way that could showcase the jumping off points that a card could offer your creative brain. And I wanted to use those prompts and in some ways the spreads to teach people, readers, it's infinite. Like you can take a card and you can create as many new questions, as many new prompts, as many
Yes.
new ideas as possible from them. Here's some examples of how I did it. So to answer your question, I've gone like very long. So I'm really excited to talk about, I think, how the idea came to fruition. I wanted it to be as versatile as possible. And I wanted it to be in the making of it and in the experiencing of it to feel like a creative act whilst it's being used.
I mean, mission accomplished, because, and I love that you spoke about the practicality of it as well. That is so something that I appreciated, because I'm someone who can just like be way too wordy and like go like I don't know, way too far. And I feel like your book just kind of like brings you in and allows you to really focus on the task at hand and is not overwhelming at all. And yet it still packs a really powerful punch. And I think that you just executed that like so wonderfully. And the fact that I was thinking about this earlier before we hopped on here, just like flipping through the book again. And I just thought it was so cool that you have an interpretation and then somehow, all within just a few pages for each card, are able to accomplish really like creative and interesting exercises, multiple exercises for most cards, a spread. And then you have these really interesting kind of quotes or sayings also attached to the card at the beginning of each page, which makes you start thinking about the card before you even really flip into the interpretation or the exercises and the creativity components. And all done in a way that, like you said, is not overwhelming. It's all very accessible. And I flip through and I'm just like, how did she do this? Like, it's all,
Thank you.
it's seriously very well done. It's quickly become, I know it sounds like I'm like gushing, but it has quickly become one of my kind of like favorite go-to books, because it, a lot of times, and I feel like this book is accessible for anyone, regardless of where they are in their tarot journey, whether they're a beginner or super seasoned, because you can just grab it and you know that you're not going to feel lost. You're going to be centered. You're going to get some clear, concise interpretations, but you also leave room for folks to be curious about their own experience with the card, which I think is really important. Because I think, with all the material that's out there, and I think you and I are similar in that we really want people to have autonomy over their practice. And I think folks can kind of get into this thought process of what interpretation, or how am I supposed to view this card, or how am I supposed to experience it? And I think the goal is to always cultivate your own personal relationship with the card. And so much of your exercises and the way that you've approached this help the reader accomplish that. So I think that's just really important.
Thank you. It means the world to hear. I appreciate that so much. And I agree. It's so important from a soul point of view and from a creative point of view to feel like you can work with what the cards are offering, but you can go far beyond it. I think about Pamela Coleman Smith a lot when I'm thinking about the tarot as a creative tool, because really, she took the inspiration of the pip cards that had very little to go off of and very rudimentary guiding words from A.E. Waite, and created these incredible images that now artists have been working with for 100+ years. And that took real creative bravery to go, okay, I can take what little I've got based on the numerology, based on the elemental associations, and based on a little bit of commissioned instruction, and then made 54 gorgeous pieces of art that we didn't have before.
Right.
And I think we have to push our own vision of every card as far as she did. We have to create our own version of every card anew and go, okay, here's the information I'm working with, super helpful. and then create it new in whatever circumstance and context we find ourselves interfacing with the card. And I don't know about you, but I find in workshops a lot, in conversations a lot, in readings a lot, there is this, right, but what does it mean? And the
Yeah.
beautiful question is, well, what do you see in it? And where do
Right.
we take that? Because we have to do that
Yeah.
first step of tell me where it's hitting you in the heart first. Tell me
Mm.
where it's expanding for you. Which is why it's such a perfect art form, because you have to have that interplay. Gotta have it.
Speaking of the interplay, this actually leads nicely into something I really wanted to talk to you about the components of your book. And it's these short kind of phrases or quotes that you have above each card, because that's what really kind of prompted some really interesting discussions among the folks in the book club that I ran with Tarot for Creativity. And the specific one that stands out is the death card, because you have, above each image in the book, you have a little like quote or saying, and the death card was kill your darlings. And that's not everyone is familiar with that saying. And so I really want to pick your brain right now. I thought it was really clever to use some short quotes to highlight the card. So I'm super curious. How did you come up with these quotes? How did you decide which ones to use? And then I would love for you to talk about this idea of kill your darlings and what it means for folks who are not familiar with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I will first and foremostly credit my my very first agent, Maddie Belton, who represented me as we were seeking to sell this book for the quote idea. Essentially, we wanted, as we were taking the book out to publishers, we wanted the table of contents to feel a little bit different than any other tarot book where you just have page one, the Fool,
Yeah.
go find it, whatever. Maddie had this idea that what if we treated the table of contents like an index, essentially, where of course you could go find whatever card you pulled, or you could go find whatever card you're curious about, but what if you could see what the creative issue you maybe wanted to solve or were experiencing at the time, and go to the card that has something to offer about that. So that was the idea behind giving each card a little bit of a phrase or saying, which is to help readers who maybe didn't own a deck or were maybe really trying to solve a specific creative problem, a little bit of a shorthand for, okay, if you're experiencing this, maybe this is where you want to start. And so in terms of choosing them, sometimes I will say it was not a straightforward it was not a straightforward process. Sometimes that one sentence summary, something like hype yourself with the sun, came really easily. I was able to go, exactly what I want creatives to think about is hyping themselves up when they see this card. Others, I would have to write through a couple of versions of the essay and then boil it down to a title. It really depended. I did turn to that initial ebook that I wrote often, to those couple of sentences that I wrote in that really early phase of this project coming together, to help me boil down some of those. But it was a really interesting process to me as well, and a good example, I think, of collaboration, because it wouldn't have occurred to me to work that way if Maddie hadn't suggested it, which I love. And I've received a lot of great feedback on that feature. Who was it who told me, B. Skolnick, who's a numerologist and is great, used the book and said that the way that she's using those little title cards is she'll do a spread from the book, and then she'll just take the one sentence advice for the reading and go, okay, so here are the three things. So I need to kill my darlings, I need to own my creative voice, and I need to do whatever else, which is a really fun way of using it, which never occurred to me. And really cool to see how people are taking it for themselves. The kill your darlings, right? A phrase attributed to any number of writers. I think I've written it in the book, and I am not looking at it right now, so you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong. I think a couple of the beat poets have been credited with that. I feel like somebody's credited it to Virginia Woolf or Sylvia Plath at some point. There's no real clarity on who wrote it, but loads of authors have been credited with writing it. And the idea with Kill Your Darlings is, as an artist, you have to get comfortable with letting certain parts of your art go in order for it to be received by an audience or in order for you to feel like it's ready. A great example of this is actually within this book. Tarot for Creativity is in it. It comes in three parts right now: the major arcana, the minor arcana, and then some exercises and appendixes at the end. And it originally had an entire other part that was really in-depth tarot advice for writers, tarot advice for artists, tarot advice for, filmmakers, dancers, whatever. I had like an entire final section that I wrote and that we cut.
That'll be another book. It's okay. That's a whole other book.
And a lot of that, I have been able to use a lot of that in sharing kind of snippets of what the book can do for you. They turn into workshops. It's great. It was an important experience to write, but we cut an entire part of the book, and that was a real kill your darlings moment for me.
Yes.
And like actually darlings that were very, very kind of hard won, because I went back and forth with my editor about this section and how we would write the section many times. So it was one of the hardest parts of the writing process to create. And then my final editor said, "Do you know what? I don't think that we need this here. And I think the book is a lot cleaner and a lot more inclusive if we're not then saying this is specific to writers, this is specific to artists," which, I understood. And it is a much more approachable book for some less information. And as we say, all of that's going to get used. But it was 15,000 words that got cut. And it was hard. And I think I had to go back to myself into this Kill Your Darlings chapter to go, but this is part of the process. And, the death card always invites us to embrace change and to move beyond what was and to cut some cords and to mourn what we are leaving behind, which is a crucial part of the creative process. And I had to go back to that and really sit with what I'd written to myself about the way that cutting the weeds allows what is left to be nourished and to grow taller. And I think it's been the case with allowing those 15,000 words to go, seeing them as other opportunities. I had an excerpt of that kind of B-side published in a publishing blog a couple of months ago, which drew some attention to the book. I worked with Literary Hub on a piece about memoirists that had tarot for memoirists that had been born from that initial kind of what went to the chopping block, essentially.
Yeah.
It's still hard. It's still hard to talk about in more
I can
kind of
see
initial vision, and yet
I can see it. Yeah.
The book is better off for it, and it's not wasted. And so I think it's a perfect example of some of the guidance from that card and how it looks for real in our creative life, to use the cards as witnesses to our creative experience, advice when it's really difficult. Yeah. Does that answer the question about Kill Your Darlings?
Absolutely. And, thank you for being so kind of open and honest about that. I'm sitting here thinking like, wow, so many times, when you're when you're in either a helping profession or a creative or coaching profession, you learn different tricks and techniques and things that work and how to help folks. And you don't often get to share how that tip or technique or experience has personally impacted you, or that you've had to utilize it. And so to hear that, you wrote about this concept of kill your darlings with the death card, and actually in this book had to kill your darlings, I think makes me love the book even more now.
Thank you.
Because, and this is audio format. Maybe one day I'll go to video, but I mean, you and I are on video right now, and I could see even just like the way you were talking about it, that it was obviously a really uncomfortable experience to have to let go of something that clearly, you poured a lot of time and effort, and, it's a part of your brain, right? Like anytime we're doing something creative, our brain and our soul, like we are taking a little piece of that and like putting it in there. So then for someone to say, hey, actually, we're not going to use this part. It's kind of like, well, where does that piece of me go now?
Yeah.
And then you have to be even more creative and say, okay, do I just let it sit for a bit, or do I use this as an opportunity? And I think, you discussing what you just did, you showed like, yeah, I had to be okay. I had to release some attachments to this. Oh God, we could go down a whole other off topic phrase about Buddhism and like non-attachment and all that and how attachment is suffering. But really that's what you're exploring with Kill Your Darlings is, letting go of these attachments and the hopes and with even, some kind of personal faith and belief that it's the right thing. So I really appreciate you sharing that level of personal experience. Which now I'm wondering, through this whole process of writing this book and figuring out how you wanted to explore the tarot for creativity and even just the cards themselves for you. I mean, I imagine that there were some moments that you had where your relationship to either tarot or your own creativity probably shifted. I mean, I feel like you just maybe described it during Kill Your Darlings, but yeah, how has your relationship to the cards and your own experience as a creative been changed through this process?
Oh, I could write a book about that. Yeah, I mean, so much in more ways than I think I can even begin to articulate just now, seeing the other side of it. I started working on this book in 2020. It hit shelves at the end of 2024. You and I are talking in December of 2024. It's been on American shelves for about 2 months and British shelves for about a month. And so it still feels very new in the world and yet very old in my world, which has been really, really, really interesting to kind of witness from both sides. I took a break from last Christmas up until about September of this year, thinking creatively about this book. I wrote another book within that period of time. I ghost wrote a book for a client within that period of time. And so when it came the moment for it to be published, I felt like a completely different writer than the person who had put pen to paper. I had published a book in the time between when I started writing this book and when it hit shelves. I had written several more. And so it's been really interesting to look back at everything this journey has taught me about my own creative momentum, doing what really excites me, how I like to work. I've worked every project I've worked on in the interim has worked differently, and there are things that I would go back and change about the way that I approached this project in the process. But it's been really cool for this to be an extended, because it means so much to me, because it really is a book of my heart, for it to be extended over several different versions of my career, to see it extend over several different versions and different kind of eras of my creative experience in life and career has been hard and also really, really gratifying. I think it's a very special book to me. For that reason, it's been a very deeply emotional book for me to put out into the world. Never before, and so far ever since, have I felt quite so sensitive about the reception of a project. And that will change, I think, when I publish a fiction for the first time. I think long form fiction, I publish short stories, but never long form fiction. And I have a real appetite in my heart to publish fiction. And that feels very personally revealing for me. But I suppose this book, more than probably any other project I've worked on, is very revealing of my process, the way that I think about creativity, what I want to share with people. And so it's been, wild, really vulnerable. And also, I felt like I fought for it in a lot of ways that I haven't necessarily fought for other projects, which is beautiful. And I love knowing that I have that energy when I really want something, but also, it's really vulnerable.
How could it not be? I mean, like I was saying earlier, it's like, you give a piece of your brain and your soul and you're just setting it out for people to to judge and to like or to not like. And as humans, we're tribal creatures, and we need to know that we are included and that we belong. And so it can be really scary to show a part of us that, can be perceived in a way that maybe we don't intend it to be perceived. And we're losing control over, how folks are interpreting something that we create, because it's up for them to interpret. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
But that's scary.
It is. And it's funny because I always say I start all of my readings like this. I can't tell you definitively what a card means and what it doesn't mean. I can tell you what it reflects to me. I can tell you what I believe about it. I can tell you what I know about its history, about how it's been received by others, what other readers have told me, what other people have told me. But I can't tell you what a card means. And I invite discussion and I invite, querence all the time. I go, if you want to argue with me about what a card means, by all means, please, because I need the information from you.
Yes.
And yet, even though that is absolutely what I want, even though within the pages of the book, I'm like, you don't have to take everything that I say for gospel. In fact, I hope that you don't.
Oh my gosh, for real.
I hope that
Same.
you find something new within the words. It is also, you read a review of your work where somebody goes, you got the interpretation wrong. And you're like, no.
Or like, for me, I'm just like, that's the point. Like,
I know.
Like,
exactly. Good. No, tell me what it means to you. Don't tell me I got it wrong. Just tell me what you see there instead. And I welcome that and I want that. And then at the same time, it's also, it's always very vulnerable to be like, I didn't see what you see. I didn't see what you needed there. I didn't offer that. It's a funny experience, as you well know, to have so much of yourself and the way that you think and the way that you process available to everyone.
Yeah. I feel like this kind of segues nicely. I did want to spend some time so folks can see your book in action. I really wanted to explore some cards. So I feel like even just like the discussion we're having right now, we can, as we're talking about like, feeling vulnerable, it's like, okay, let's get into it. Let's have people judge what you've written. But so normally, when I do kind of guest podcasts, I really do like to pull kind of on the spot and randomly, but I wanted to be a little bit more maybe prepared or intentional. So I did pull ahead of time because I at least wanted to explore one card kind of like in depth. And then I'm thinking maybe we can even do the spread for the card that I pulled together. Maybe if you have a deck nearby, if not, I can pull for us.
I sure do.
But I ended up, so for folks who are listening, I ended up pulling the Eight of Pentacles, which I actually thought was pretty fitting, because, your book is centered around creativity. And one of the ways, and of course, we were just saying, not everyone is going to agree with this, but one of the ways I view the Eight of Pentacles is kind of diligently working on your craft. Of course, it can mean, kind of literal work, what you're doing with your career. But I think also for the sake of this conversation, it felt really nicely. And there's a portion of your interpretation that really resonated with me. And I want to read it verbatim for folks. You say, and again, this is the Eight of Pentacles. The card makes no promises about outcome. It is not assurance that practice makes perfect. Instead, it centers on the process, the meditative quality of making progress for your own satisfaction, a goal that creatives often lose sight of when they share or monetize their work. And I felt that so much because, and I feel like this is such an important interpretation and reflection, not just of the card even, but for just artists and creatives in general. Because, and I feel like I talk about this at least maybe once a week in my therapy practice, because I do tend to see a lot of folks who are creative. And, we live in a world where we have all kind of been conditioned to produce for the sake of producing, for the sake of capitalism, and not for the sake of well-being, or like you said, for personal satisfaction. And so to be reminded, because I think when we see this card, when we pull the Eight of Pentacles, we can often have this reaction of, I need to work harder. I need to do more. And I need to, kind of like have this assembly line of productivity and things to like put out. And then we lose sight of the fact of, is this serving me? Does this feel good? Am I doing this for my own well-being? And there was just something that you had mentioned about like personal satisfaction that I was like, Yeah, we need to sit with that for a little bit. Like how much of what I'm doing actually helps me and feels good for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a special card in the context of creativity, I feel. When you told me this was the card that you'd pulled, I got excited because I was like, I think in many ways, this card represents a big part of the thesis statement of this book in the sense of I want people getting their tools out and trying stuff. And in the Rider-Waite-Smith edition of this card, you see the craftsman is hammering away at star after star, and each one is a little bit different. None of them are uniform, none of them are perfect, and yet all of them are going up on the wall. And there's something to me that I find really comforting about that there's value in every single one, even though they're not uniform. I love the idea of creatives being organisms and not machines. We are no two leaves on a flower looks the same, and yet it's grown them and they're perfect. And I want that experience for people who are looking at this card, but we have to embrace a sort of like, I don't know, the bad art's worth going up on the fridge along with the good art as long as we made it. That's so important to me. And I think what I hope comes through in the book, and it would be really cool to pull a couple of cards for the spread. What I hope comes through the whole book, and certainly through this card within the context of the book, is that you will not get anywhere, whether personal satisfaction or fame, riches, six-figure book deals, good luck to you, whatever, unless you're willing to get down on your knees and kind of do the bad work and put the bad work up on the fridge along with the good and mine and figure out what's good and keep showing up. And we can't keep showing up as artists punishingly, because once it loses its novelty, what's the point? What's the point of making art for a living if you don't want to? If you have to make yourself do it, it should be, if not joy, then curiosity, then comfort. It should be something more than because I have to, that draws us to the canvas, or that draws us to the page, or that draws us to the clay or whatever. Because no matter how much money or outward success you're going to get on a product, with art making, with creativity, if you haven't enjoyed that process or found something else within that process, I don't know that you can feel fulfilled by it. I don't know that you can call what you made art if there wasn't any kind of soul moment within it.
Right, because then at what point are you just another machine, putting things out, and so I think you talking about kind of getting back to that foundation of what drives you, which I do think is even tied to this Eight of Pentacles anyway, like what originally motivated you and gave you that excitement to want to create all these things, that, are going up this tree trunk. And then there was something you said too that reminds me of, how you were talking about how not everything's uniform, not everything's perfect, and you have to kind of like keep creating anyway. So often when we find ourselves in a place where we're either like in a creative rut, or we're afraid of not doing it, quote unquote, perfectly or doing it well. I have to tell folks, I have to remind myself this too, maybe just make something that is intentionally bad. Like sometimes I was working with a client the other day on some sort of art project. And I was like, okay, just intentionally make something that you think is silly and pointless, just so that you can like get back to the keyboard, just so that you can put your fingers on it, without any sort of, oh, I have to do this or it has to be great. And I feel like that was kind of the underlying message, the way you were talking about the Eight of Pentacles, because we can view it through this kind of all or nothing overworking lens versus, oh, let me just get down, into the nitty gritty, get dirty with my work and just create for the sake of creating.
Yeah. I will come back to this book as an example. Several times did I hit cards where I wasn't happy with what I was writing about. And a lot of it was because I had the pressure on myself to write an elevated essay about the card. And I couldn't get into my draft and write. I couldn't open the manuscript and add to it. And so when I got particularly stuck on a couple of cards, I would open up my email and I would write an email to myself. I would title it The Shittiest Version of the Star Chapter. And I would send it to myself. whatever I
Look
could
at
get out,
that.
I would just write some really crappy paragraphs and send it to myself. I probably would never open it again, but there was
Mhm.
something about going, I've now written the shittiest version. It's in my email. I can
Oof.
refer back to it if I need it. And like the clearing of just being like, this is it. This is the worst version of it.
Yeah.
And I've got it, and that's done now. Actually made all the difference in the world in getting the decent chapter.
Look at that. Even the way you're talking about like the clearing, I love the synchronicity of this because there's always like patterns or kind of things that happen in my work that like show up over like a month or a week or whatever. And I've been talking a lot about lately, it seems like I didn't use the word like clearing out like you did, but I was and have been using this word like to dispel or expel or discharge because like oftentimes like we're so overcome, like for example, if we're talking about like creativity, like fear or having a block of some sort, that we know that we want something to come out of us, but we are afraid for it to come out because it might not be good, or we don't even know where to start. But yet we still have this energy inside of us that is building, that we like do want to create something. So it needs to be discharged in some way in order to create the thing that like we actually really want. And you just described perfectly a really practical way to do that: opening up your email and sending yourself the shittiest version of this card.
It works
That way
wonders.
yeah. So I love that. And actually, I feel like even the exercises and prompts in your book are a way to do that. Like even for the Eight of Pentacles right now. So you have each card has not only the interpretation and the spread, but also a portion where you have creative prompts and exercises for folks to do. And so for the Eight of Pentacles, you have write a haiku, but something that you did that was clever was not just write a haiku. You're going to write a haiku and then rewrite it 7 times. So in total, you will have written it 8 times, which I loved the play on the number, obviously, for the Eight of Pentacles. But then you also have join a co-working group, decorate or decorate a dedicated practice space, and then journal about your relationship to practice and process. So you have and have given folks who may be feeling stuck clear ways to expel or discharge that and clear that energy that we were just talking about and that you used via email. So another way that this can be really helpful for folks. So yeah, I thought that was a really smart way to utilize the cards.
Thank you. I ran that haiku exercise in a workshop about a month ago, and it was I was a bit afraid when I told everyone, write your first haiku, and I just had everyone write one, and then I was like, and now you're going to do it 7 more times, and I'm going to sit here and wait until you've written 7 more haikus. I thought people would be like, you're joking, 7's a lot.
It is.
But actually, that meant that people ended up with 2 or 3 pieces that they really liked, and 4 that they could toss out because they had this. They weren't putting all of their haikus in one basket.
Exactly.
Or maybe they were. But it's a really fun idea. Just look, it's 3 lines. What have you got to lose? Write 7, write 8. See if you like any of it, and see where that takes you. And I think that's something that I love about the tarot generally, and the creative nature of it. Unlike a reading where I really invite people, if I'm like doing a sit down reflective reading, I really invite people to sit with whatever card has been drawn and not draw additional cards, until you've really worked with it, or draw clarifiers or new cards if you don't like the answers. But if you're using a card to get over a creative block, by all means, keep flipping them over until you see something. You've got 78 to work with. Something's gonna shake you up in there. And I think why not? Why not be a little bit playful? Why not lay them all out and just see what speaks to you? There's nothing more fun than like laying out an entire suit and going, okay, which one's actually talking to me and which one can I create from today?
Absolutely. Give yourself permission. All right. Well, let's pull for the Eight of Pentacles spread now. So it's 2 cards, which I also love because super kind of like quick and accessible. So the first prompt for this spread is, how can I support myself to practice my craft? And then the second is, what kind of benefits will this practice have on my creativity?
Gorgeous.
So I'm using, what'd you say?
I said, who wrote that?
I know, right? I'm using Jessica Doerr's new deck, the Change Tarot. I've been using this lately. What are you using?
I haven't got it yet. I have got the Everything Little Thing You Do is Magic tarot by Callie Little and Moria Steele, which I'm loving.
Oh, nice.
It's gorgeous. It's a great creative deck, and they have a every song or every card correlates to a song, and so you can go listen to the song. It's fantastic. All right, so the first one is, how can I practice my craft?
Yeah, how can I support myself to practice my craft?
How can I support myself to practice my craft?
So I ended up pulling the Queen of Swords, which I think is hilarious because that's my card. Like that is a card I resonate with the most, and it's my favorite card in the deck. So like when this happens, like you can't help but just think like, go back to kind of like who you are at your core. And so for me, the Queen of Pentacles is very, very straightforward, very kind of like very logical, to the point, get shit done, doesn't mess around. So I feel like this card is saying, oh yeah, like if you're needing support in your craft, like what has worked for you in the past? Oh, you like to make lists. So, and you like to be organized. So maybe start making a list and organize your thoughts. Like that's so Queen of Swords, the intellectual thinking, logical process. So that's funny. And then the second card I pulled for the prompt was what kind of benefits will practice have on my creativity, was the Page of Wands, which feels so sweet because, oh my God, the Page of Wands is so reminiscent of like that new relationship energy when you're kind of like buzzing with excitement and inspiration, and you feel like there are like endless possibilities. You're kind of just like, oh my God, I could do this and I could do that. And what about all these things? And you're really kind of fired up. So seeing these two cards together for this prompt is really sweet because it's like, oh yeah, go back to what works for you. Because when you go back to what works for you, you're going to feel reinvigorated and inspired, which, we all kind of like lose sight of what works for us. We all fall off the wagon and then like have to figure out how to get back on. So that was an easy 2-card spread that really was helpful. What did you end up pulling?
Well, I got a sword and a wands card too, so
Stop it.
Similar energy. Yeah.
No.
I have, and this makes complete sense to me. For how can I support myself? I've got the Four of Swords. So gorgeous. It's a sleeping fox in this, a red fox or a red panda in this image, and we're having this conversation right now. I've taken my first vacation in years, and
look at that.
Really, I didn't bring my laptop. I'm speaking to you from my phone. This is the first work adjacent thing I've done in a week, and I really needed that space and that sanctuary of not expecting myself to do a working holiday, to do a writing holiday, to really just retreat a little bit and find a bit of rest and stillness. And I think very much am I not done with that yet. And this feels like a reminder. I go home tomorrow, but to preserve some of that rest and space feels so deeply important. I've been thinking a lot this week as I've been walking and reading and allowing myself to do nothing about how important it is as an artist to allow space for things to drop in and for us to observe and experience the world. And we can't do that if we're trying to squeeze blood from a stone at the desk every hour of the day, which is something that I'm more than guilty of sometimes. It completely supported by how it will benefit me. 8 of Wands.
Another 8 too, because then you're off to the races.
Yeah, it just feels like, hey, step back, allow the space, allow for the rest to put things back into motion. I think I'm really afraid of things coming to a standstill if I do. And in fact, the promise there to me is, it's a really beautiful version of the card as well. This 8 of Wands. It's a flock of geese all taking off in the same direction. So there really feels like rest, allowing things to align and take off in a way that I'm ready for. Life has felt chaotic over the past couple of years whilst I've really charged forward in creating a publishing career for myself. And now it does feel like time to sit down and allow for some space for new things to drop in instead of just automatically chasing whatever. lands on my
Absolutely.
plate next.
Wow. Look at that. And for us to each end up pulling a sword and a wand, that feels really special. That's exciting. And yeah, I hope that folks are, able to pick up this, this new book, Tarot for Creativity, because, and again, even if you're not, you don't self-identify as an artist, there's so many good things in the book that you will find beneficial to explore just for yourself and life in general. So
I agree. And I make the argument in the book, we're all creative, but I can only imagine that any listener here has an interest in the tarot, which is an inherently creative endeavor.
exactly.
Pulling a card is storytelling. And so even if that's your only kind of quote unquote creative touch point, it is one. If you're journaling about the tarot, you're doing creative work. Every single card in the book includes a journaling prompt as well. So if that's where your comfort zone is, it's there for you. And yeah, I hear that from people a lot. I'm just not creative, and I don't believe it, because we're all doing something and making something in our lives somehow, some way. We have ideas, we have imagination. Why not
being a
channel
human?
with the tarot?
Yeah, being a human means you're inherently an artist, a creative, because you're creating a life. You're creating your life.
You don't have to be a professional. You don't have to put your work on the internet. You don't. It doesn't have to become your side hustle. In fact, there's something, to come back to that Eight of Pentacles. There's something really beautiful in just doing it to do it.
Yep.
And doing it to do it to do it to do it. And as we should.
Absolutely. This was such a fun conversation. I always appreciate kind of sharing space with you and chatting with you. And I really value your work. And I'm excited for folks to pick up Tarot for Creativity. Can you share a little bit more about where folks can find you and anything else you have going on?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I will say again, the feeling is absolutely mutual. It is always so beautiful to share space with you. Friends, you can find my book anywhere. It is available through all major retailers globally. It's online on the big A, but also through independent booksellers. You can find it just about anywhere. You can ask your local bookshop to stock it. If they aren't, they will order it in for you. I do recommend the print version. The ebook is available, but I have had some feedback that it's not available on black and white e-readers, so be aware that you should have a tablet if you want the digital copy, but I do recommend the print. You can find me on the internet, Chelsey Pippin-Mizzi. You can find me on Instagram at PipCardsTarot and on Substack at theshuffle.substack.com. And my website is the name of the book, tarotforcreativity.com. So if all else fails, name of the book. You'll find me.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. For more tarot and mental health content, follow The Tarot Diagnosis on Instagram. You can also subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and sign up to receive the Tarot Diagnosis emails, where you'll have access to exclusive spreads and exciting announcements. To join an incredible community of tarot and psychology enthusiasts, join the Tarot Diagnosis membership community, The Symposium, by visiting thetarotdiagnosis.com.